Hey, I don't know if you guys, I was gonna do a YouTube video on this. I might still. This is just like a quick meme because a lot of people don't seem to understand this. Based on the YouTube comments, I don't know if it's people that are just stupid and don't want to understand it and are just looking to shit on me, or if it's people that genuinely don't understand what I'm saying. When people bring up Islam is a religion of terror, and I point out that there are peaceful Muslims in the West and that Christians also pull really fucking retarded things. A lot of people, when I do that, a lot of people act like I'm doing that as a deflection. Like, oh, you just don't want to talk about Islam. You're deflecting to Christianity, blah, 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 blah. Like, it's not the same thing at all. Christian terrorism isn't anywhere near as much as Muslim terrorism, right? Blah, 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 right? People keep saying that. I don't disagree with any of those assertions, right? There are some factually true statements that you can make today. One, I'm pretty sure that the majority of terrorism around... I don't even know that. I'm pretty sure that the majority of terrorism right now is probably caused by Islamic people. I'm pretty sure right now that most Western, predominantly Christian countries are very successful. I'm pretty sure that there are a ton, probably a disproportionate amount of Muslim countries that are really unsuccessful. When I bring up the fact that Christians used to be very fucking violent, or I bring up the fact that there are peaceful Muslims looking in the West, what I'm looking to do is give you something to think about a little bit more that might give you reason to suspect that there are better explanations for why people act the way they do than just their religion, if that makes sense. Do you understand? So when somebody says, compare Christian countries to Muslim countries, look at how violent Muslim countries are, look at how violent Christian countries are, it's like, okay, well, but I think there are other things that can explain this, because there are very peaceful Muslim people that live in the West, which there are tens of millions of them, maybe even hundreds, I don't know. There are at least tens of millions of peaceful Muslims that live in the West. And there have been horrible Christian actions in the past. There are horrible Christian actions in the recent past. Different random attacks and terrorism and all that fucking bullshit. So I think that there are better ways to explain what's going on than by simply saying, well, these people are ex-religion, therefore they're probably going to be terrorists, right? That's when I deflect to that. I'm not trying to quote unquote deflect. I'm just trying to say that there are probably better things that explain what's going on here than the fact that that they're Muslim. That's what I'm trying to say. Stop trying to find reasons. Muslims and Africans live in year 1600. Except, I think you're racist. I mean, if you looked at Iran, pre the Iranian Revolution, Iran was a fairly progressive place. I think Jordan decriminalized homosexuality, also a Muslim country, before any other country in the world did, I think. Just look back at history when the Muslim countries were undoubtedly the most powerful in the world. They were even being considered very progressive for the time. Yeah, sure, the Islamic Golden Age and shit. I know that shit happened, but when you see a lot of anecdotal evidence that you classify as being true, you're not going to care about statistics. Yeah, maybe. Islam is different in that they have not had a reformation. I don't know if I believe that. Fuck me, dude. I need more history to speak about this. But I see that meme passed around a lot. Christianity went through Reformation. Christianity went through Reformation. What Reformation are you talking about when you say that? Because I don't remember there being, and I could be totally ignorant, history is not my deal. How many big reformations of Christianity were there through the 1800s and 1900s and 21st century? Because the Christianity that we practice in America today is very different than the Christianity of the 60s and 70s, right? And the Christianity that was around in the 60s, 70s in the United States is very different than the Christianity that was around in the 1800s and the 1900s, right? I don't know if you're talking about literal Renaissance time periods and the Reformation and shit, the Protestant Reformation, yeah, shit like this, I don't consider that to be valid. Christianity went through a Reformation, when you say things like the Protestant Reformation, this is the 16th century, dog. We were burning witches at the stake, past that Reformation, under the name of Christianity, right? So Christianity wasn't reformed then, right? It's just gradually in the Western world, over the past few hundred years, we've gradually been moving in a more secular direction and a less religious direction over and over, or year in and year out. We vote for gay marriage, we vote for equal rights, we vote for women's rights, right? We gradually move away from that. I don't think that it's a massive Christian reformation. I just think it's a matter of, typically, when people live in freedom and when they have economic opportunity available to them, they usually don't like being treated like shit. It seems like that happens. Christianity in EU is a cultural thing and has very little impact in politics. Yeah, which is the direction the United States is kind of sort of heading. But Christianity still very much is important in our countries, politics, on our money. If you take out any dollar bill or coin in all of America, if you look at a $1 bill, it's written right on our currency, in God we trust. Oh God, I don't even know where it is. It's somewhere on here. Is it on the other side? Fuck. And I think it's on our coins as well. I think it's on the backside. I haven't looked at it. Listen, I'm not gonna lie. I haven't looked at actual currency in a long fucking time. Yeah, there it is. In God we trust. They've got the Illuminati period and everything. It's like on our currency, right? And in our Pledge of Allegiance, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation, under God, right? Then we've got people that want to have like monuments of the 10 Commandments, literally in in public courthouses and shit. Yeah. Read ISIS's own words on the topic. It will change your mind. Wait, why? You know that ISIS's goal. This is the goal. This really bothers me. It really bothers me when you say this. The goal of every extremist group is to make it look like they identify with every person that they say they identify with, right? I've always wondered, like, this always seems so strange to me how easily people fall for this, because I think that it shows an inclination that you have inside that you don't want to admit that you have. Let me give you an example of this. If a woman comes up to you and a woman says, I'm a feminist, I think that all men are evil and all men should fucking die, and also men are fucking pigs and are disgusting, and you're like, yo, dude, like, you're crazy, like, what the fuck? And then she's like, oh, so you hate women. You're like, no, I don't hate women. I just think you're a crazy bitch. Whoa, what the fuck? When did this become about all women? What are you talking about? No, I'm not. It's not, right? You notice that they always try to do that. Extremist people always try to bask in the majority or pretend that their opinion is majority thought. Alt-right people do it too. Crazy feminists do it. Sometimes the really, really extremist LGBT people do it as well, right? Someone will be like, I think that there are 50,000 different genders and I should be able to identify as anything I want, and I think we should have sexual conversion for 8-year-olds. And you're like, whoa, dude, I mean, 8 adolescents like doing sex change operations, that seems kind of extreme to me, dog. I don't know if that's like a good idea. And like, oh, so you hate all transgender people. Whoa, I didn't say that. Whoa, what do you mean, dog? Well, you just said it. You hate it. No, I'm just saying that you're particular, right? They always try to broaden their shit. But then when ISIS comes out, and ISIS is like, hey, by the way, dude, we've got the new caliphate. We want to murder everybody that opposes us, everybody in America. Oh, and also, by the way, and then you're like, dude, like, your shit is crazy, dog. What are you talking about? You're violent and fucked up. And he's like, oh, well, so you're saying that all Muslims are fucked up? Because that's who we represent. And you're like, yeah, all Muslims, dude. All Muslims are totally fucked up because of that shit you're saying, right? Like, why? What? It always blows my mind that you're so eager, you're jumping and frothing at the opportunity to allow ISIS to redefine all of Islam. But any time you're talking about something that is in your interest, you will never let an opponent do that. You would never let an insane feminist redefine her view as representing of all women, because you don't want them to say that you hate all women. You would never allow an insane LGBT person to redefine their brand as representing all LGBT, because you don't hate all gay people, right? You don't hate all LGBT. I assume most of you don't, right? But when somebody from ISIS, you literally linked me something and said, read this. This is what ISIS does and why they say it. It'll change your mind. You're telling me that ISIS is trying to broaden themselves to include all 1.6 billion Muslims? Of course they are. Why would you let them do that, right? I believe that your underlying logic is flawed. How is my underlying logic flawed? All I'm saying is just anytime you're arguing, just think about this. Just think about it. Anytime in your life you've argued with an extremist's goal is always to misinterpret your attack as an attack on a much broader group. If I say, hey, you're being racist, dude, and some guy is like, oh, so every single person that votes for Trump is racist? Well, that's why Trump won, right? No, what the fuck? I'm not insulting every single person that voted for Trump. I just think that, like, your beliefs in particular, or I'm not insulting every single rural person or every single Republican. I just think that these beliefs are crazy. And they always try to rebrand themselves as larger, right? Or there are things you can say to, like, anybody, right? Or to a Democrat or anybody on the left, maybe a guy on the left will say something like, I think $15 an hour minimum wage is good for everybody. And you're like, dude, 15 an hour minimum wage? Like, damn, that's a crazy high wage. And you're like, oh, so you hate poor people, right? Because every single person, and you hate all these things. It's like, whoa, hold on. No, I'm just talking about this specific thing, right? But then when ISIS comes out and says, we're Muslims, you're like, yes, I hate all Muslims. But, yeah, I don't know. All right, hold on. What other factors do you think influence terrorism? Okay. Destiny, I disagree. ISIS explicitly condemns to death Muslims who do not align with them. Sure, any extremist group will condemn to death anybody that doesn't align with them. That's the definition of an extremist group. It seems to me that when you get places, this is my total bullshit fucking understanding. If you have a continent, okay? If you have law and order and rule in this continent and people get along, then that's a good hombre. Good hombre. Okay? Anytime you take a region and you make it unstable as fuck, if you destabilize parts of it and you cause a lot of chaos and tension and bullshit to happen there, then you wind up with a bad hombre. This means people become extremist. People turn to non-government forces for protection. People are more likely to be getting caught up in these extremist groups as they look to recruit people, as they look to expand their power, and that the longer the time period goes on, and any sort of area that is destabilized, the more bad that an hombre will become. Right? If you have a good scale and a bad scale to measure the good and the badness of an hombre, this can be directly correlated with time. The longer something gets fucked up, the badder of an hombre this person becomes. Do you understand? Do you genuinely believe that Islam and Christianity are comparable, or is it just your natural instinct given your upbringing? I think that it's hard for me to say that Islam and Christianity are comparable because I don't have a very thorough understanding of Islam, but I have a much better understanding of Christianity than 99.999% because I actually went to school and I know what the fuck it means to be at least Catholic and what's in the Bible. And I'm pretty sure the majority of Americans have no fucking idea, have never opened the Bible past whatever their preacher tells them to look at, the 2 times they go to church a year for Christmas and Easter. And I know that Christianity has a lot of very fucking horrible things in it. Really, 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 really fucking bad shit. Stupid, horrible, bad shit. You don't even have to go to the Old Testament necessarily to find some pretty backwards ass shit. But religion doesn't usually play out that way. That's the problem. That's the thing that a lot of a-religious people don't realize this. Like, this is like the autistic, I can talk to you on stream. I'm really hungry, dude. We can talk for like 5 minutes if you want. Islam seems to be a means of control to empower individuals and keep the underclass in line. It just happens to be a pretty good religion to do so, as the writing itself supports much of the radical rhetoric. I mean, so does Christianity's writing, so does the Bible. No, Destiny, suicide bombing doesn't get you into heaven in Christianity. Like, this is one of the worst, like, kind of false... I see people like that say, they're like, well, suicide bombing isn't something that has ever existed. I don't think there are any other religions that suicide bomb, but, was it Catherine? There are saints that are made saints because they let their entire families be tortured and murdered, like children murdered and tortured and flayed, and then their own bodies murdered and tortured and flayed and annihilated and everything, and they go to heaven because they're being good martyrs. Like, that happens. That's a very common way to become a saint, is to martyr yourself or your family or other people for some cause, right? Like, that happens a lot in Christianity. So, like, when you say something like, well, you don't suicide bomb to get to heaven, like, no, but you could let your entire family and children be, like, ripped apart and brutally tortured and murdered in order to get to heaven. Like, it's happened. Like, Destiny cites Crusades as something bad Christians did. Doesn't know why Crusades were fought. I haven't brought up the Crusades a single time, actually, in this entire conversation. That sounds like a talking point that you've, like, read before and you really, 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 really want to go over because you think you have, like, the ultimate counter. But in reality, you're just fucking retarded. I literally never brought up the Crusades a single time in this conversation. I'm just talking basic religious history, something that you probably are totally fucking clueless about because you were, like, so eager to bring up the Crusades or whatever. Like, but okay, dude. All right, what's up? Can you talk? We got
okay. Can you
4 minutes. All right, what's up, buddy?
Jesus Christ. Okay, let me just mute that. How you going, mate?
All right, what's up? Let's go. Real fast. What do you disagree with?
I disagree with almost everything. I am a first-class honors graduate with Bachelor of Psychology, self-employed, and I also work with immigrant populations, primarily, at the moment, it's not really Syrian immigrants, it's Islamic immigrants, traditionally from Iraq and Afghanistan in the last few years. I'm in Sydney, Australia at the moment. I think that the biggest issue that I genuinely have is that I think that maybe it's because you're an atheist and you grew up in a really Christian household and you saw the sort of inherent hypocrisy and lack of understanding of like with your parents and Christians around you who weren't really paying attention to the tenets of their text, that you believe that the tenets of a religious text aren't inherently indicative of a person's behavior. And I would disagree when it comes to Islam, because I think that Islam is structurally, textually, pretty much in every way different to Christianity, which makes it a lot harder for actual Muslims to be, I guess, nominal Muslims, you'd probably call them. So yeah, pretty much everything when it comes from...
Okay, can you explain to me why there are so many peaceful Muslims living in the West if they're all bound by their holy book in this way that you say they are?
Okay, so what do you mean by peaceful? Do you mean non-violence causing?
Yeah.
Okay, so generally, violence is a rarity among Muslim populations. That's fine. But when you look at Muslim populations that have a higher concentration within the population, as it approaches sort of like, I don't know, 10% of a population, you start to get issues regarding that. You know, in Sydney, we've got a Middle Eastern crime squad which specifically targets Muslim Lebanese immigrants who are proportionally massive contributors of crime. But I think generally it's not so much just, expecting full-on terrorist attacks. The more Muslims you get, generally, the more terrorist attacks you get. I think that's a reasonable statement to make.
Well, wait,
But
hold on. That statement was super dishonest. Like, the more immigrants
okay.
you get, well, like, what? Like, the more immigrants you're getting from, like, war-torn fucking countries and shit, the more immigrants
No,
you're getting when
no, no,
you
no,
got people
not
like ISIS and
necessarily.
shit. Like, I guess, like, my problem is that, like, there are so many millions of Muslims that live in the
Yep.
West that don't seem to, like, do all these terrorist attacks and shit. So how do you explain their existence when you say that they're fundamentally bound by their holy book? I don't understand.
Okay, so do you understand the difference between, say, a jihadist, an Islamist, a conservative Muslim, and a nominal Muslim?
Maybe in really basic terms, but not, like, exact
Okay, so
beliefs.
so a jihadist would be someone who intentionally desires to use violence to enforce their religious beliefs and their political religious beliefs on other people, right?
Okay.
Those are the people you see in ISIS. Those are the people who are in Al Qaeda. These are the sort of the bad hombres, as you'd probably put it. But then outside of that, you've got Islamists. So you've got people who don't intend to commit violence, but would like Sharia law in their state and go through political channels and political means in order to enact that non-violently by
Mm-hmm.
getting political weight behind it. Then you've got conservative Muslims behind that, who are people that you probably wouldn't want, one of your children marrying. People who believe that women shouldn't have an education, that women shouldn't be allowed out of their house, that all of that sort of stuff. Apostasy should be punished by
Yeah,
death.
okay. Yeah, these are the
So
general
yep,
things. Sure, yeah.
yep. Okay, so I think it's a little bit disingenuous to purely say, okay, number one, since the immigrant crisis, we have had more Muslim terrorist attacks in Europe, right? So if you wanted to take the first premise that there's no correlation between increased Muslim migration and an increased
Yeah, but
amount
again,
of
when I'm
terrorist
saying that
attacks. Yep.
geopolitical issues contribute a lot to radicalization and people being more prone to commit terrorist attacks, you're talking about immigrants and refugees from areas that are
Okay,
geopolitically
what
fucked.
about what about Muslims born in London who commit terrorist attacks and go over to ISIS to fight, even though they're second or third generation English
I've
people?
heard that most of these are coming from like ghettoized areas and whatnot.
Have you seen any data related? The Al Qaeda hijackers were all tertiary education, university qualified international students. Osama bin Laden was educated overseas. The argument that you
Yeah,
have
but
to be
like
poor.
I thought the 9/11 hijack. No, I'm not saying poor. When I say ghettoized,
Yep.
I'm sorry, I don't mean poor. I mean like ostracized from society, like lacking
Okay.
integration, like feeling like society hates you. I've watched I've watched probably too many of the ISIS recruitment videos, and that always seemed like what they were targeting. Like, do you feel like you don't have a purpose? Do you feel like like where you're at, you're not respected? That everybody thinks that your culture is a joke? Like that seems to be the especially the German ones were all targeting that kind of idea to recruit people to come over.
Yep. So regarding ghettoization, okay. Well, do you believe that? How do you think the process of ghettoization occurs? So I can tell you that both of my parents were born in Australia, which is rare, but my
Mm-hmm.
grandparents all emigrated from Greece in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. They all came over, immigrated here. There's a huge migrant population in Australia, obviously, especially in Sydney with Greeks, Italians, Lebanese, Chinese, Vietnamese. We've got a huge immigrant population here. And the process of ghettoization is one that requires a degree of apathy or intense dislike from an immigrant population, right? That's something that I would argue that to be ghettoized when you're coming over here,
Mm-hmm.
and to remain in a ghetto and to form a ghetto and to have all of those issues that are associated with it, where you get Muslim majority areas like
Sure.
Molenbeek in Belgium, I think that requires something on the part of the community who is emigrating to the new country.
You could argue
Um,
just as easily, though, that it also requires something on the part of the community that's receiving them as well, though. I mean,
okay, so like I can talk about Sydney. It's a good example, I guess, of any other sort of modern capital city who imports people, right?
hmm
There isn't another population group within Australia, sorry, within Sydney specifically, immigrant population group that has the same issues that the Muslim community has. And these aren't Muslims immigrating from primarily war-torn nations. These are people primarily coming from Egypt and Lebanon. Those are our largest Muslim communities, and probably Turkey as well, which aren't,
gotcha.
um,
This might be
you know,
true. I'm really uncomfortable. I can't talk about anything about Australia. I really
okay,
know
okay,
nothing
okay,
about it.
Okay, so what I would suggest is that generally, and this is a pattern that's common across Europe,
Hmm.
that Muslims are generally, as a new immigrant group, overpopulated and overrepresented in our prisons to the extent that other immigrant groups who come from war-torn areas, whether it's anywhere through the south of Asia, we have a Sri Lankan community, or even through Africa with the Sudanese community, you don't get the same levels of ghettoization, you don't get the same levels of domestic violence, you don't get the same levels of violent crime that you do among Muslim populations. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily because you're a Muslim, you're going to perpetrate criminal activity. What I'm suggesting is that there are, not because of war or socioeconomic status, but the actual cultural and political inertia that these people have as a product of their religion disadvantages them in integrating with a new host society. And
Yeah,
I think
sure,
that's
but I
something
guess like
that's
I guess my argument in general is that I would say the same thing of almost every single religion. But again, if you look at places in the West, or I guess I can especially say the United States, it seems like we have a lot of Muslim people that aren't constantly trying to convert everybody to Sharia. And even same thing with Christians. Christians are acting less Christian today than they ever had, and it seems like as they become more secular, the world kind of becomes a better place, or the world they live in.
okay. So why has the Islamic world, not just in the Middle East, but also in communities outside of the Middle East, in host communities in different countries, why have they apparently started regressing? Where we've seen second generation migrants, second generation citizens of countries who are Muslim, say in Britain, going off to fight, for ISIS instead
I
of
mean, I don't
the
think that this is
British
a
armed
majority of
forces.
Muslims. First of all, this is a very select
Yep.
minority.
Yep.
Secondly, I mean, the entire United Kingdom just voted to leave the European Union, and a large reason for that was immigration. I think that there are
Mm-hmm.
a lot of like countercultural kind of things. These English Defense League and very right-leaning people that are very white nationalists, very anti-brown. I don't want to say anti-brown person, but very anti whatever other culture, whatever people. I mean, I think there's a lot of rejection from the West in general to Islamic things. I don't know. It's hard to guess. I guess like what is your solution to these problems? What is,
Uh, Look, I think that the argument that I've always found it a poor argument when people suggest that the reason Islam is like this is because they haven't had a reformation. I think that's a very poor analogy, and I think the reason it's a poor analogy is because when you actually look at the Christian Reformation, the big thing about the Christian Reformation was that it was actually going back to the religious book and away from the Catholic Church.
okay.
So, during the whole Protestant Reformation, you had Martin Luther and the printing press allowing the translation of the Bible into German. So
Hmm.
all of a sudden, Germans could actually read the Bible and realize that the Catholic Church had been lying to them through the practice of selling indulgences and purgatory and all of this other bullshit they'd come up with to maintain control. Whereas a Reformation in the Islamic world, in the sense of going back to the Holy Book, is actually what, say, ISIS is doing or Al Qaeda is doing. That is a adherence to the religious text. What nominal Muslims are doing, what secular Muslims that I've got plenty
Oh
of
yeah, but
friends who are
wait. For
secular Muslims.
Christians, you
Yep.
know that all of our advancements in Christian nations has been getting away from the book, not going back to it, right? That a lot of the problems that we face in the U.S. today are people that hold on to their Bibles a little bit too tightly. Like that's where a lot of like really backward, stupid, retarded thought comes from. Like the idea that this might sound unreal to you, but like the fact that there are people in the United States that want to teach creationism in science
Oh, that's not
classes,
unreal. There are
right?
people here as well.
Okay, sure. Yeah, these are
That's
all
that's not
Christian
yeah.
thoughts. The idea that that women shouldn't be allowed easy access to contraception. These are religious thoughts, purely 100% rooted in religion. The idea that gays should still be not allowed to marry each other and enjoy the same benefits socially as married people. These are, for the most part, very predominantly religious thoughts. The idea that religion is inseparable from your country and that we are one nation under a Christian God and that people should be made to understand that. Like these are all very religious. Like in 1952, I think we added the under God in our pledge, or 1954 or something, and then the in God we trust and Christ read. Like these are all negative. I would label these thoughts as objectively negative and culture putrefying things that need to be gone immediately. And these only happen because people still cling to their religious books. So like I don't think a quote unquote reformation of Christianity where you go back to your holy book, I don't think that's a good thing at all. I think that all of the progress socially that you've seen in the West and Christian nations has been getting farther and farther away from the Bible.
Okay. So talking about the Reformation argument, I was making the
Uh-huh.
argument that the Reformation was a good thing in 1600s.
Well,
Like
but
going back to the Bible was a good thing in getting away from the grasp of the Catholic
yeah,
Church.
it might have
That
been,
was
but
my
that was
argument.
going
I'm
from,
not
but
saying-
that's like going from one really bad thing to another really bad thing. Like going
Yeah,
back,
no,
like
but
because even
yeah,
after the
yeah, look.
1600s, Christianity was still converting and murdering people that didn't believe in them, or burning witches at the stake, or
Okay,
running.
I think you're misunderstanding a little bit of what I'm saying. I'm not saying that that was a good thing. I'm not saying that Christianity and its role in American politics is a good thing.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that the argument that people often make about Islam not having a reformation is a flawed argument, because the Reformation in the Christian sense was adhering more closely to the Bible instead of the Catholic Church. So the equivalency for the Islamic world would also be adhering more closely to the Koran and the Hadiths and the biography of Muhammad, as opposed to some other organization or group who are advocating a certain thing. But I entirely agree with you about all of those issues in the American system and with Christianity's view. But if you want to, again, use it as an example, then you need to be honest and say, what are we comparing? We're comparing all those things you said. Gays not being able to get married, poor access to contraception. I'm not a fan of abortion, but some people would argue that the role of Christianity in preventing abortions in certain states is an issue. Embryonic stem cell research is another issue. All of those are issues. Sure, I 100% agree. But let's compare it to the actual issues that an adherence to the religious texts of Islam would result in, because they're not equivalent. And I think that's what I think a lot of people say who watch your chat, who always give downvotes every time there's a discussion on Islam. What people get upset with is when you're saying that it's not even equivalent, but roughly equivalent or barely comparable, that an opposition to embryonic stem cell research is the equivalent of throwing a gay person off of a roof.
But it's
or
not
saying
about
that
equivalence. It's about, no, because that's not what the point of a comparison is. It's not to say the two things are the same thing, right?
Yep.
People want to play this like dick waving and like, is Islam in a worse state than Christianity right now? Yeah, absolutely. Sure, of course. I would never deny that. I'm not saying that somebody living under Christianity in the West is as oppressed as somebody living under Islam in the Middle East or whatever. Obviously not. But the solution to making Christianity better was never a reformation of Christianity. It was people becoming less Christian. Now, whether people want to acknowledge that or not, most people won't, because most Christians are ignorant as fuck when it comes to their own religion. And I know this because I'm religiously educated, and I see a lot of Christians that don't have any fucking idea what they're talking about, even regarding their religion. But like, the solution has always been move people out, move people into wealthier areas, educate people, get them better jobs, and empower them economically. Right? Has always been to seem the thing. Right? And then from there, like social issues and all sorts of other things, happen to follow along. Then there was never a massive goal to make people less Christian, because that's not a real solution. That just doesn't work. That was never the plan, right? Much the same way that when you have an argument with Islam, and as I said before, if every Muslim around the world was the same as the Muslims living in the West, you agree that the world would be a better place, right? There might still be some terrorism or some extremism or whatever, right? I mean, sure, there is with everything, right? But the world would be a better place, right? Yeah?
Yep,
but
I
these
can agree
people
with
in
that.
the West, they're still Muslim. We didn't have to convert them, right? They just follow a different flavor of Islam than the people living in fucking
Yeah, but
Saudi
see,
Arabia, right?
Yeah, look, so that's where I think you run into a little bit of issue, because I would describe myself probably as a non-denominational Christian. I went to a Anglican school for 13 years. My family's Greek Orthodox. I have definitely strong disagreements with much of the stuff that my sort of family church, like the Greek Orthodox Church, their opinions, because they can be pretty full on and political in their arguments. But for whatever reason, I am still a Christian, and it's one of those things that's difficult to articulate why. When
Sure,
but at
I mean,
the
like,
same time,
I know there are.
I
Go ahead.
contextualize my Christianity, and I understand my book. Like, I understand that I'm not going to sit there and say that we should be throwing out lawn furniture that a woman on her period is sat on because it says that in the book of Leviticus. I'd much prefer to just live my life by following the example of, say, Jesus Christ in the New Testament, because I think the worst you get from following Jesus is probably being a bit too much of a hippie much of the time. And I think the issue where, like you're saying about you wouldn't have to get Muslims to convert and this and that, part of the issue is that there are actually structural arguments within the Quran and the Hadiths against.
There are
say,
structural
converting.
arguments in the New Testament, though, against, like, say, like the equality of women. Notice how all 12 apostles were all men, right? This is why in the Catholic Church, only priests can only be men, right? The Pope is a man, right? You can find structural things, like in the Bible, that even kind of further, some pretty even in the New Testament, that further some ass backwards ideas. I don't know. I know Muslims personally, which I counts for fuck all. But I'm sure statistically speaking, in the West, I'm sure that you've got a lot of Muslims that disobey what is it, halal or whatever, like what the fucking food they're allowed to eat, and how
they
strict
drink and
they
they eat
are.
pork and
And how
and they
strict they
pray
are with
five
wearing
times
their
a day.
hijabs and shit. Yeah. So
Yep.
I mean, like it seems like if we can like my solution of stopping the massive fuckery that goes on with this countries from foreign powers, allowing these people to become economically empowered and moving them socially in that direction, even if they remain Muslim, will create a better world and a world in
So-
which these people can exist, rather than this idea of, well, Islam is the problem, they need to all convert or whatever. Like,
No. Look, I'm not saying they need to convert. I work with, 2 weeks ago, I was on placement in a detention center.
sure, but if you say Islam is the problem, that's kind of what has to happen, right? They have to
Well,
become.
I would say that regarding terrorist acts, regarding the higher amounts of criminality among Middle Eastern populations, I would argue that the main problem is Islam, because that is what is an invariable. That doesn't change.
But that's not
country to
true. It
country.
does change. There are terrorist organizations outside the world that aren't Islam, and there are also Islamic people outside of the Middle East that aren't terrorists. So clearly, it's not a one-to-one. Like, and if you look at things like ISIS, like a lot of this shit is political. Like where they get their recruits from, how they're able to grow inside of these countries. Like a lot of this stuff revolves around political stuff that's going on, not necessarily like we are Muslims, so we will be ISIS. Like, in fact, that's like a minor or almost a non-contributing reason to some extent. Like,
Okay, so what I would ask is what would you suggest is the similarity when a third generation Egyptian born Muslim and a first generation English born Muslim and we've had people from Australia leave with their young boys and young girls and go to fight with ISIS. What is the among all these people in different countries with different levels of socioeconomic wealth and education, what would be the variable that leads them to go and fight for ISIS?
I mean,
And I would argue that the variable is their religion.
If you want like the best indicator for somebody likely to be a terrorist, I'm pretty sure that the best indicator is probably 18 to 36-year-old male is probably going to tie these people together better than any particular
but the
ideology.
Psychologist in me would say that that's a very broad sample you're cutting, and so
But the psychologist in you would have to acknowledge that the best indicator for violent crime around the entire world is being an 18 to 36-year-old man, like bar none.
100%.
There is no better indicator than that. Like, right? Is the salute like? I mean, I know that there are to some extent these people are tied together, maybe loosely because of religion, but it's also because of all the things that impact them, like how people treat them because they are that religion too. Like, I think that a lot of that plays into like if you are in a culture that constantly shits on you, that is constantly trying to get away from you, that is constantly demonizing you and trying to label you as part of your problems, it's probably a little bit easier to recruit from this base of people. Like at one point, you have to acknowledge that at some point you're getting into a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So say you have a bunch of black families, right? And say these guys are a little bit more prone to crime. You're like, well, I don't want to live next to these fuckers. These guys are prone to crime. So then you fucking, you gentrify the fuck out of them, move them out of all the nice areas, throw them into shitty fucking ghettos, fuck their work opportunities up, put them on welfare and give them crack and shit, right? And just fuck everything up with their lives. And then they continue to commit more crimes. And you're like, well, look at this. Told you. Look at these fucking darkies shooting each other up all over here. Well, yeah, but I mean, to some extent, like that's self-fulfilling, right? You have to be careful not to get into these crazy. That's why, for as much as people criticize him, that's why Obama understood that. And that's why he was really hesitant to say, that this is an Islam problem, because that just furthers the fucking meme. Where like if you're quick to label 1.7 billion people as your enemy, of those 1.7 billion people, some of them will take that banner up and be your enemy. Why would you do that? Why would you ever want to claim like, hey, all of you guys that are Islam, sorry, but Islam is the problem, and all of you guys have this commentary? Like, leave that to the extremists. Let them radicalize people. Don't contribute to it.
Okay, so two things. One, the thing you were saying about the biggest predictor being 18 to 30-year-old men as the biggest predictor of terrorism, I agree, but that's not a necessarily practical argument to make when we can hone in on something more.
Well, but
accurately.
that's my argument. I don't think Islam is a practical argument either, because there are almost 2 billion Islamic people. It doesn't help.
But these things aren't mutually exclusive, right? So a 18 to 30-year-old Sri Lankan is going to have a different probability of being a terrorist than an 18 to 30-year-old Syrian Muslim.
If you look at the people doing the recruiting, this is my problem, okay? You have two groups of people that live in Iraq, okay? A third party First of all, they're only in this balance of power because a third party, the United States, assures that Saddam Hussein is allowed to remain there, right? So third party comes over, dismantles the government, and then puts a different party in power. That party in power spends all of their time shitting on and oppressing the other group of people, right? These other group of people experience higher unemployment. They get hurtled off into death camps. Peaceful protests get disrupted by the military and people get killed, right? These are people that are ripe and prime for recruiting for an extremist organization. And lo and behold, an extremist organization moves in. These people recruit almost instantly. And then this is your base of people that are now reaching out to other people around the world to recruit them. And then it's like to point at that and go, well, I don't know, dude. I mean, they're religious. It's like, well, fuck. Yeah, I mean, I guess they are. But there was a lot more going on there that was way more relevant than the fact that they were religious. Way more relevant than their religion there. A lot of this was political shit.
I think that argument is good if you are just talking about terrorists who are like, if every Muslim terrorist came from Iraq or Syria or even from the Middle East, I would agree 100%.
Yeah, but how many of these Muslim terrorists, how often do you hear like a random Muslim guy decided to go out and murder somebody because he was Muslim, blah, 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 rather than like a call out to ISIS, or rather than a call out to crimes in the Middle East, or rather than a call out to supporting Sunni aggression in, in Syria and Iraq, or, supporting the Shia evil in fucking Iran. Like, it's a lot of it, so much Islamic terrorism is traced back to bullshit going on in that Middle Eastern region that has so many geopolitical conflicting interests competing there for territory or power or positioning.
If every Western actor and Russia pulled out of the Middle East entirely, do you believe that would even come close to resolving part of the issue or not?
That's really hard to say, but I mean, look at what Iran was like before the Iranian Revolution. Like, this is a country that had women going to school and dressing up in shorts and blouses and shit. And like, I mean, I don't know, what would it look like? I don't know. That's really hard to say.
Let me flip it around.
I mean, look at Saudi Arabia. The whole reason that Saud family is in power is because of fucking Great Britain. Like, or the arbitrary slicing up of the land after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, how countries were just kind of cut up and thrown to the fucking winds. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, I feel like this is all shit. I mean, you have quote unquote countries that exist that don't even really exist, right? Like Palestine, is that even a real country? Like, no one even fucking, not really.
Let's flip it around.
Or the not the Turkish people, the Kurdish people or whatever, right? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. What about say Indonesia? What's the issue with Indonesia? Why do they have female genital mutilation rates of up to 100% in certain regions?
I don't know anything about Indonesia. I'm not sure.
Well, what about Turkey? That was for the longest time held up as the jewel of the Islamic civilization as a secular state, who just had an Islamic dictator fabricate a coup and started murdering judges and teachers, while mosques at the time were urging people to go to the streets and fight against the military. There is something. The problem that I have is, I think that because you grew up in your religious environment and you saw the flaws in logic and the hypocrisy and the basic fact that most Christians don't read the Bible and have no idea what's in the Bible. I agree 100% with that claim. And I think what might have happened is that it's common amongst a lot of people who aren't religious is that there's a lack of empathy. And by empathy, I don't mean not a lack of caring, but an inability to say, put yourself in the shoes of a genuinely religious person, a person who is genuinely religiously fundamentalist, where no amount of argument or persuasion or information or education can change their opinion on something that they hold true, and that's inherently infallible. And I think the biggest problem that I think you might be engaging in is that I don't think that you really believe that these extremists actually believe what they're saying they believe, if that makes sense. I don't know.
They might, but the problem is, what I'm saying is that given these same circumstances, these people could be radicalized under any other religion. These could just as easily be Christians. That given the same set of circumstances, given the arbitrary division of countries, given the leaders constantly installed and then toppled and then reinstalled by foreign nations, and then given the massive oppression that they face, and then all of the outside funding that comes in from other people with the same religion to fund them, I think that any religion could easily be radicalized and cause some fucked up crazy shit.
That's a point that we can discuss. I think that's an interesting point. So do you believe that due to, if you put any sort of pressure on any other religion, you could get the same results. That's the argument, that you're just saying the religion is really a means to an end, but there's nothing inherent about, say, Islam that makes it different
There
from
there
any
might
other
be
religion.
some inherent things, but outside of like an extraordinarily different religion, I think that for the most part, yeah, I think that most would play out relatively the same.
Okay, so what would it take for your mother's quite a religious person?
Hmm.
What would it take, do you think, for your mother to pack her bags, head over to Israel, and wear a burqa, well, not a burqa, let's wear a nun's outfit and start murdering people who she identified as heathens? Like, what would it take, do you think, to be able to turn her into that as a Christian?
I have no idea. I'm not sure. I'd have to think about it.
So I
Probably
think
Trump getting impeached might. I don't
so
know.
yeah, well, yeah, that might, yeah, but the problem that I have is when I work with these immigrant populations, and I'm responsible also for producing reports based off of interviews with a translator. Um, I have to give recommendations whether this person should be cleared, whether this person shouldn't, um, and the the sheer level of brainwashing that these people have is very difficult to articulate. Like, the creationist example is probably a good one, where you have, that fucking psycho with the banana saying that it's God's
Hmm.
divine instrument, but then how the hell does a coconut have food in it? Like, he never explains that one. Like, when you get to that level of insanity, I get it. But with Islam, okay, if I, as a adherent of Sunni Islam who had only ever read the Quran and the Hadiths and the biography of Muhammad and never spoken to anyone else apart from those textbooks, it would make perfect sense for me to put a bomb on myself, or pick up a sword and run into a shopping center and start murdering people. That would be something that my texts plural, inherently would portray as an inherently noble thing. Why? Because if you kill a heathen or an apostate, they're going to go to hell and you're going to go to heaven. If you die in the cause, it's in waging jihad for your religion. If you kill an actual Muslim, that's also a good thing, because then they're going to get to go to heaven quicker. So you have this perspective on reality that means that you can do no wrong, that um,
Yeah,
you
but
can be,
you can manufacture those same incentives for Christians. People have done it when they've
as
murdered
easily
abortion.
done,
Yeah. Oh,
as
yeah, of
easily.
course. Yeah, easy.
Okay,
The
so the murdering abortion. Okay, so I
or gay
am
people or whatever when they're beaten up. These are subhuman people. These are disgusting people. Yeah, sure. God will reward me
okay.
in heaven for
Sure,
any time you
sure,
believe in some
sure.
spooky boogeyman that's going to promise you with some bullshit in an afterlife. Yeah, I think you can manufacture any
Okay,
reason to convince
okay.
yourself.
So right now, let's what we can do is we can test that claim, right?
Oh
So
shit! Are
I
you
can
about to
play. I
radicalize
can.
my
No,
chat?
no, no. I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm not. I'm sorry. I won't do anything too bad. But we can use the actual texts themselves as arguments. When you're arguing with a religious person, you need to argue according to their text, right? That's all they believe in. That's all they're going to give a shit about. Nothing you say or do or talk about secular morality or pluralism. They don't give a shit, right? They're only going to be able to talk about what's in their texts, right? So, Bible, Quran, different texts. The Bible, there are very few Christians who would argue that the Bible was handwritten by God, or was written through God, through an apostle. Most people would argue that it's an accumulation of different texts from a bunch of different people and a bunch of different authors.
Hold on.
On the other hand,
Did you leave a comment on one of my YouTube videos?
no, I've only ever I think sent you a Reddit message a few months ago regarding transgenderism. That's the only time I've ever, I think,
Okay.
contacted you.
I
But
disagree
no,
with
I
that
didn't.
assertion. I think that, at least in Catholicism, I think the teaching is that everything in the Bible is the Word of God. That even though they were human authors, they were divinely inspired by the Holy Spirit to write. They were essentially dictating from what the Lord told them.
Okay, but how many Christians? By Christian, I mean anyone who would put Christian down as their religion on a census, right? So from the creationist to the person who never goes to church and doesn't read anything, doesn't give a shit about being a Christian. How many Christians do you think? Like, what proportion of Christians do you think actually believe that text is infallible, even though we've got 30 different translations of it? I would argue that the average Christian probably doesn't believe that the entirety of the Bible, from start to finish, Old Testament and New,
Sure.
is the word of
I
the
would
Holy
argue the
Spirit.
same about the average like secular Muslim in the West, though. About the
Okay, yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah.
Sure.
I
Okay.
agree with that. I agree that there's a lot of commonality between, again,
Okay.
the Muslim and the Christian who just put their religion down in a census but don't practice it. Those are the people that really are going to be the healthiest and happiest people in a society generally.
Okay.
Um, the Quran, on the other hand, if you so much as alter punctuation on that thing, and there's a reason there's only one version of the Quran,
Wow,
and
this
it
is the
can't
longest
legally be translated amongst many countries within the Muslim world into another language, is because every piece of punctuation, every brushstroke, every letter on that thing is the literal word of God spoken through Muhammad. Right? It's a small book. I've read it a couple of times as I've read the Bible and everything else. The thing's tiny, right? It's a little pamphlet compared to the Bible, which is a huge, unwieldy, inherently contradictory text. The Quran is allegedly written by one bloke, and it's the word of God. So right there, you've got a difference between the two different religions, where as a Christian, it's perfectly reasonable for me to get into an argument with a priest and say, you know what, I don't really think the Bible's written by God.
Oh, no. That's absolutely not true. From a theological point of view, you would just be wrong. If you were a Christian that said that, you would just be incorrect, if that's what you think. Or you're not Christian at that point.
No. Literally written by the hand of God.
Yes, but divinely inspired authors that were dictating for inspiration from the Holy Spirit himself. Yes. It's not by
every
man.
Single book,
yes, every single book in all the ones that made the Bible. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's a denominational issue because there are plenty of denominations.
I'm pretty sure Protestants and Lutherans believe the same thing. I'm pretty sure Baptists do as well, and I know Catholics do, and we have our own country.
How come we can have dozens of different English translations of the same text?
Because a translation is treated a little bit differently, I guess, in Christianity, whereas people don't see like a massive deal in using one translation versus another, as long as the same message is being conveyed.
Which is not the same in Islam.
Okay, sure.
Translation is.
I mean, I would argue that the Islamic way is actually superior. I mean, you go through the issue of having to learn the language, but I mean that's why we have memes where Moses crosses the Red Sea instead of actually crossing the Sea of Reeds. Right, that whole thing stems from a mistranslation. But I don't see how
the Quran has the issue of mistranslation of 72 virgins, where it's actually meant to be 72 almonds.
Okay,
and that's another sort of thing endemic in the text. But I agree with that. So we can move past that and say that I think it's a fair assertion to say, at the very least, if you were to poll every single Muslim and every single Christian, I think on average, as a majority, I think you would probably get more Muslims saying that the Quran is the word of God as opposed to Christians. I think that would be my
but that's my argument, that Christians are more secular though, and that
but that's a good thing, because I think part of the advantage as an atheist of Christianity is that the Bible is a terrible document, really. When you look at it as far as consistency and tonality and any sort of basic literary analysis of the Bible will lead you to believe that it was written by a whole bunch of different people at a whole bunch of different times, and it's inherently contradictory, right? And that's a good thing as far as enmeshing or integrating into a modern secular pluralistic society. Because for as many people that can quote the Old Testament at me, you can quote the New Testament back at them, or you can quote one passage by Jesus against one of the apostles, and all of a sudden you've got like a theological debate going on, as opposed to a this is how it is and this is how it should always be. So all of those different contradictions are actually, as an atheist, I think generally that's something that should make a lot of people happy who don't believe in Christianity, because it lets them argue on a theological ground. And, the most common argument against Christianity is how contradictory the text is. But that's not the case in Islam. It's
sure,
not
but that's not even necessarily true. An atheist uses that argument when he doesn't understand the religion, right? You have a Bible and you have stories, but it is the job of religious scholars and the jobs of your priests in order to help you, the clergy or the layman, understand the message that you're supposed to get from each of those stories. Technically, if you understand the text perfectly, there are no contradictory messages in the Bible. Nothing contradicts itself in the Bible. It shouldn't. And if something seems like it does, that's because your particular interpretation is incorrect, or you need to reconcile it with a priest or some sort of religious scholar to tell you what it is that you're mistaken about.
Exactly. Correct. But that's a good thing. Like that's a very, very good thing, that you have to go through all of these hoops, and different priests are going to disagree and different denominations are going to disagree. So you've got this rich ground for disagreement and argumentation, which I would argue is a positive that Christianity actually has. Whereas Islam, have you read the Quran or the Hadiths or the biography of Muhammad? Have you read any of those texts?
Nope.
Okay, I think that it would do a world of good for your perspective and for your argumentation.
How would reading the text, though, give me a good view of how?
Because the text is what because every single terrorist and every single conservative Muslim. So, what percentage of the Muslim world would you suggest is conservative world over, including Western countries?
I can't make that. I have no idea. I would
Okay,
have to
so like there's plenty of polling data on different countries, and even in Western countries, even in England, a question like should homosexuality be allowed in this country can get up to a 90 to 100% disapproval rating amongst, say, English-born Muslims. Like, I can get all the polling data and everything if you want, but these views are they're clear as day when it comes to religious text. And if you believe in the primacy of your religious text, and the whole thing about Christianity, I'm the way, the truth, and the light, blah blah blah. The whole thing's about just following the example of Jesus Christ and believing in the resurrection.
Right now, you're making my argument for me, I think. When you say things like, if you believe in the primacy of your religious text, right? Your whole argument is that not many Christians do, right?
Yeah, but most, if not all Muslims do, is my argument.
But there's probably far less in the West than in the Middle East that do. Right? That's why earlier you agreed with me that there are many Muslims in the West that don't wear the hijab or whatever, the bullshit turban all the time, that don't that do eat pork and drink alcohol and work on whatever, if they're not supposed, I don't know if they have like an equivalent to Isaiah, but that don't pray 5 times a day facing towards Mecca. You agreed with this earlier, right? So there are a lot of Muslims living in the West, probably a much higher percentage than those living in the Middle East, that don't believe in these things as well. And I think
that's changing though. That's
you think they're becoming more radicalized?
100%. I think that's been the progression of the Islamic world. You've been doing all of your political studies on the Islamic world over the last 100 years post World War One, and the Islamic world is becoming more and more radicalized. Look at Turkey. Look at Indonesia. Look at Omar Mateen. He was an American born.
I don't know as much about him. I mean, the Middle East is. I can't look at anything in the Middle East because everything is so hardcore fucking politicized. Like, it's impossible to get a pulse on.
Irrespective of if it's politicized or not, it is more Islamicized at this point.
Yeah, but a lot of it is the result of geopolitical influence from outside of its own borders.
It might be the result of that, sure, and it might not have occurred in that situation, but unfortunately, that's the reality of it. So now we need to deal with
deal with the problem. But the problem that you deal with is to stop influencing that region so heavily. It's not because then I guess I ask you again, then what is your solution? Because it sounds like you're saying people just need to convert or whatever, which is never going to happen.
No. People, okay. Regarding solution, I don't actually know if there is going to be a solution, because I think even if Russia, America, and every other, I'm Australian. We were in there in Iraq and Afghanistan. We were in there from day one under John Howard. And our later prime minister. So, we have a similar familiarity with the region and the issues of the region. But I think if everyone pulled out instantly, you would get the situation that you currently have with ISIS. Because fundamentally, if you leave, there are still going to be Shiites and Alawites and Sunnis and Baathists and the remnants of all of these groups now engaging in sectarian internal religious violence. When you go on LiveLeak and you watch the videos of ISIS, they're interrogating bus drivers and asking them how many times a day do they pray and how do they pray, to deduce whether or not they're Shiite Muslims.
Sure, but the big problem has been, this is the problem that we have in the West, is that we will never acknowledge a country's stability if that country isn't 100% sucking on the teat of America. Like, that's the problem. Like, if you look at a country like Syria, like, that is a country that can exist peacefully, but America definitely had a ton of political and financial interest in throwing over Assad, and it's why we threw so much fucking money at the moderate people in the West, and that were residing in fucking Turkey and all that shit, to go and fuck with that country, right? A lot of that was because America had a geopolitical interest there, and so we decided to throw a fuck ton of money and shit and funnel a whole bunch of resources fucking with Assad there, right? We had special forces on the ground, we had CIA training, we had all sorts of people backing up the FSA and the 55 other groups helping them, right? This was something that America was doing to destabilize Syria, which led to further radicalization of people there. If you look at Iraq, Maliki, we overthrew the election results of Maliki, a guy that we put, or Malachi? Fuck, I think it might be Malachi. A guy that we put there. Yeah, Malachi. A guy that we put there, that we advocated to be there, even though this dude was crazy, paranoid as fuck, was trying to go for the second fucking genocide of the Sunni people in there. This is a guy that contributed almost single-handedly, almost unilaterally, to the radicalization of the Sunni population in northern Iraq. And the only reason he was there for so long was because the United States backed him, because he was going to be loyal to us. Right? Like, all of these things can be traced back to political issues. Like, look at Iran, a place that was pretty stable until the United States decided that they didn't like the fucking dude there and moved towards the Iranian fucking revolution and all of that shit. Or look at what has happened in fucking Libya with fucking Gaddafi, right? All of these people, if the United States doesn't like them, we move over to throw these leaders out, and then shit gets fucked in the country, and then people get really radicalized as shit gets fucked and destabilized, and then we point to it and they're like, well, look, Islam, I guess. I don't think that's fair.
Okay, why then, with, say, Christian and Jewish populations in those regions, which were radicalized, why then was it only Sunni Islam specifically that kicked everything off and was radicalized?
I mean, it depends on where you're talking about. In Iraq, when Saddam Hussein owned the government, Saddam Hussein had his little Ba'ath Party, right? The Ba'ath Party was Sunni minority, right? And the population was, for the most part, Shia. I think it's a Shia majority in Iraq, right? That were being bullied, essentially, by Saddam's government, or at least they felt that way, right? So when the position switched, they decided it was time for them to get theirs, and the Shia then decided to fuck all of the Sunnis up. And you can go and read tons of articles on Malachi locking fucking bodyguards of politicians in jail, having these crazy random Sunni torture camps, indefinite detention of people just because they're fucking Sunnis, and you have all this crazy shit. And then you look at like the 2013 the Hawija massacre or whatever, just people peacefully fucking protesting and all this shit, right? And so all of this drives the Sunni people in that country to become extremist as fuck as well. I don't think any of this had like a religion thing, like because these guys are a different Islam. It was all politics in this region.
Okay, I think I get where you're coming from. So if we were to like sort of mind map the internal logic, you're suggesting that because of largely or primarily or almost entirely in some cases geopolitical meddling and civil war and poverty and all of this just horrific shit that has been happening in the Middle East for 4,000 years by this point, those people are inherently fucked. So what I am asking is, I get that, I agree with that, I'm not disputing that. I have never and will never dispute any of the political facts that you're. It's all true. It's all completely true. But we now have an issue of Islamic radicalization. And that issue seems to be cropping up in countries that are entirely unaffected and by native populations entirely unaffected by the activities within the Middle East.
Okay, so this is what's going to happen in the next 4 to 5 years, I think. Probably sooner, okay? Iraq is headed towards stabilization. The current leader there now is not Malachi. He's not fucking crazy. He seems to be a lot more moderate and accepting of Sunnis. The Sunnis themselves recognize that and have been fleeing ISIS, right? Once ISIS is pushed out of Mosul in Iraq, and also the current PM dude is cool with the Kurdish people as well. Baghdad has already worked out deals with them in exchange for the oil mining and everything, right? I think that Iraq is heading towards a place of stability. Once Mosul is completely, once all the ISIS dudes have been kicked out of that city completely, I think that for the most part, Iraq is going to be okay. Syria is also going to be okay. The United States has ramped down dramatically their support of the quote-unquote moderates there. ISIS is losing all of its power in Iraq. Turkey has stepped in to northern Syria to fuck with I guess mainly the Kurdish people, but to fuck with ISIS a little bit. Russia is sending support by air and people on the ground for training and whatnot. China has sent over military advisors and people to help with training and whatnot. So Syria is also headed towards a better place. Once Syria is no longer a fucking failed state, and you don't have the massive flight of immigrants there, and ISIS is eradicated in Syria and Iraq, that region of the world will be a little bit more stable. This will probably happen over the next 3 to 4 years. Trump is probably going to get all the credit for it somehow, but like that's the path that it's headed on right now, right? Would you disagree that it seems like, right, you know that Assad is never going to fall because of Russia like overtly backing him, and the United States is never overtly going to war there, right? And then Iraq, for the most part, looks like it's headed towards stabilization. So it looks like that part of the world will calm down, I think. Right. Okay,
but calm down in the sense of like a three-way civil war, and then you've got Kurds and Turks and Russians and
no civil wars. No civil wars. Calm down in that. I think Iraq will actually, it seems to be, will be a good place.
I agree. I'm saying there will be no longer any open.
So I hope the dream would be that those places start to rebuild themselves financially. When no problem.
I'm going to throw this out the door.
Right. That both of these countries will rebuild themselves, that Syria will rebuild themselves. Hopefully some of the people that move to Europe will go back to Syria, their homeland, and when they rebuild all that shit, it'll be a better place. And then you just have to wait until the next proxy war, I guess, starts up, where shit gets fucked again.
Let's take all that as fact.
Okay.
And can you name me currently one Muslim majority country in the world that you would be happy to live in?
I guess aside from the female genital mutilation thing, isn't Indonesia supposed to be like a pretty decent place? Bangladesh, isn't that supposed to be a pretty decent place? I mean, I live in the United States of America right now. I'm like the best country in the world, dude. Why would I want to move somewhere else?
Yeah,
Fuck.
so that's I think the problem that up until recently people
Mm-hmm.
could, Bangladesh. There's a significant proportion of the quote unquote uh, migrants or immigrants heading into the EU who are from Bangladesh, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not a small amount. I think the European Commission came out with a study that it said like 60% of migrants were economic migrants and not even immigrants from Syria. So up until recently, when Erdogan went psychopathic in Turkey,
Mm-hmm.
people could point to Turkey as the sort of secular bastion. I've had family who's gone to Turkey. I've had Pontian family who used to live in the north of Turkey prior to all the genociding that occurred during the 20th century.
Whoa, those were genocides, dog. Whoa.
Yeah, yeah. It's all
Whoa.
fucking chunk yogurt about that
Whoa.
one. Yeah, exactly. But the issue that I think we're having now is that there is no example of a Muslim majority country that doesn't, for example, have women unable to leave the house on their own, that doesn't have equivalent standards of education with anything close to any of the Western nations or remotely Western nations in the world. So the problem that I have is that, okay, if we were looking at a situation where the Middle East was the only example of a fucked up Muslim majority nations engaging in warfare because of geopolitical machinations and all this other stuff, I would agree 100% that it would be incorrect to look at the religion as the main cause of the issue. 100% I would agree with that. But when you have countries that are on the other side of the world from each other, from Indonesia to Turkey to Muslim communities,
but that's not
in
really
France,
fair to say. On the other side of the world, these guys are relatively clustered. You go from
mate.
Central Northern Africa. You go from
Indonesia is a wall
You
off.
go from Central to Northern Africa through the Middle East and then to Southeast Asia. Like all of these parts are kind of linked. You're not like crossing oceans and shit to get to these people. Like these are
Do you know where Indonesia is?
northwest of you guys.
Yeah, there's an ocean. It's not connected. It's a while away. It is a huge nation of 100 and something million Muslims.
Sure,
it's
but
there.
you don't have people like over in like the fucking Americas or like a country like in Northwest Europe or whatever that's Muslim majority, right?
So now okay. So let's take that away and say they're not far enough to be fair examples. Then what is it about, say, let's take Indonesia, because that's probably the furthest example and the worst example I can think of close to us. What would be the reason why they have such horrific human rights violations and massacres against native Buddhist populations and female genital mutilation rates through the roof? What would be do you think would be the geopolitical explanation for that?
I can't tell you. I don't know the history of Indonesia enough. I
What
really
about
can't.
Turkey? What would be the geopolitical
Turkey
reason
is always hasn't Turkey been really fucking weird ever since the end of World War One? Like all the shit going on in there. Like,
five years ago, Turkey was one of the biggest tourist destinations in Europe. It was a gorgeous place to visit, and you.
I mean, I'm sure it still is. No. I mean, there's probably, but I mean, there's beautiful tourist place in fucking Dubai, but that doesn't mean that it's a pinnacle of like human rights and shit.
Yeah, no. By beautiful, I don't necessarily mean geographic beauty. I mean people would comment on how beautiful and liberal the people are and how the women weren't forced to wear headscarves.
Sure, I guess, but Iran was like that 20 or 30 years ago as well.
Yeah, and then
I mean,
what happened? And then Iran went on aside from the geopolitical reasons, which I accept, it had a massive uptick in Muslim fundamentalism, and then that went to shit. Just like we've seen in Turkey, just like we've seen in Indonesia, just like we've seen in Egypt. Egypt's probably another great example. With in the last few years, Libya is probably another example. Morocco is probably a great example as well. I think that the argument that it's just geopolitical. So we started with just saying that everything's fucked because of Western meddling in the Middle East. And
yeah, I guess like my problem is like when you look at good like Christian countries, you've got like European and European derivatives. Like I can point to a lot. Like for instance, like the country that we complain about in the United States the most is Mexico. They're to the south of us. That's a country that's 88% Roman Catholic. So are we blaming that on Catholicism, or are we going to?
Okay. But what is the Roman Catholic Church's opinion on the actions of the Mexican cartels?
I don't know. Is there an equivalent?
Do you think Pope Francis? Do you think that Pope Francis or the average Catholic? Like, not even about Pope Francis.
I don't think there's an equivalent figure in like the Muslim faith though, like a pope, right?
Aside from the autocephalous nature and blah 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 and all that, do you reckon the average Catholic Church in the Western world would be happy with Mexican cartels murdering buses full of people? Do you think the average Catholic Church would be happy with that?
Probably not, but I don't think the average Muslim in the Western world would be happy with.
Yeah, but you're saying the Western world, and that's the problem, because Muslims in the Western world are a tiny fraction of Muslims in the world, And Muslims in the Western world also have really fucked up values and belief systems as a percentage of conservative Muslims. Guys that you're happy to talk to and have a conversation with, and then you ask them their opinion on homosexuality, and they tell you that they should be murdered. But these are people whose daughters don't wear hijabs, their daughters don't wear burqas, they can go to school because they legally have to in a Western country. But it doesn't really change the underlying opinion. And what I'm saying is that there is consensus in the Islamic world. You know, the national newspaper in Turkey, after the Florida nightclub shooting with Omar Mateen, it advertised on the front page something like 50 perverts murdered in Orlando. Like, they referred to the gay people.
Is that like an actual like mainstream Turkish paper? Would that be the equivalent of like the United Kingdom?
Erdogan was talking about how they're being punished, and that's the president of a country in Europe.
Sure.
You know,
Europe, I mean.
Yeah, or I think technically they're on the cusp at the very least.
Yeah.
So the problem that I have is that there isn't an example of a Muslim nation, a Muslim majority nation, or a nation that is run by Muslims that isn't a complete and utter disaster, irrespective of where it is.
Is Indonesia a complete and utter disaster?
Dude, Indonesia is fucked. The level of... We had a whole issue. Didn't you ever hear about the boat people memes of hundreds of people coming over to try and get here and dying on the boats until we started shooting at them and towing them back because we didn't want any more of them? That was like a whole thing that Tony Abbott won with. Like, it's not a... Just look at female... The easiest thing to look at is female genital mutilation.
But a lot of that is conflated with like type 1 to type 4. Type 1 female genital mutilation is the same as fucking circumcision, and we do that in the United States by like to 50% of our fucking dudes. Like,
yeah, but that doesn't make it okay. I don't think defending female genital mutilation...
I'm not saying that it's okay. I'm just saying that, like, well, look, Muslims here cut parts of people's bodies off. Like, it's horrible. Yeah, but Christians do it as well.
You kind of said that it was okay when you said that it's type 1 is...
I don't think it's okay. I don't think male circumcision is okay. It's a horrible thing. Nobody should think that's okay. But I'm saying that, like, people all over the world do really fucked up shit, and to try to say, like, well, only Muslims do this thing, like, I don't know. I think that there are other things that cause it. Okay, and again, your solution, and it sounded like you even said it earlier, you have no solution to any of these, because it sounds like the only solution that you can draw from your thing is, well, make everybody convert to a different religion.
No. Okay, look, number one, when we're establishing the grounds for a discussion or a debate, if you are wanting a model solution, like if we're going to go debating terms and you would like a model. Or not even.
It's not like a formal debate. I'm just like, in general, like, what is the direction? Because I can give you general directions. I would like to see the world move that I think would not fix, but massively contribute to all of these problems in a beneficial way.
I don't think you're actually agreeing that there is a problem with.
No. Okay, then I will say. Then I will come out and say, and I've said this in the past, that I'm sure that there is, to some extent, maybe being maybe being Muslim, part of the Islamic faith, might contribute a little bit to these problems. But I think that there are other factors that are massively contributing on a far greater level than that. And again, then I ask you, like, what is like your general plan? Like, in what direction should the world move to fix these problems? If you're just saying that all of it is just because they're Islam.
The world should generally be moving towards pluralism and not supporting the countries that are responsible for these horrific views. And I think part of the optimist in me is, up until recently, the optimist in me would say that simply through a process of homogenization and just the general spreading of Western values and quality of life improvements, and all of a sudden realizing that your workforce could be far more efficient if 50% weren't stuck in black trash bags inside of your house. I would up until recently have suggested that we were heading on a natural trajectory towards everything being peachy and the average Muslim becoming more and more secularized and
well, we still are around. The world in general has always been moving towards a better place. That trend hasn't changed. It's the best time. Yeah, yes. I agree 100%. This is the best time to be alive by any sort of statistic you want to look at. There's not a single one that isn't showing that we're at the most peaceful and happy and prosperous time in the world. But unfortunately, the issue,
Destiny,
as I see it,
this guy
is that
knows nothing about the boat
for all of the reasons you have stated,
they are
and for many
mostly
more,
economic
there has
migrants
been a
from the
resurgence in
subcontinent
Islamic
and refugees from the
and I
Middle
think that an
East.
Islamic fundamentalist
They go to
is going to
Indonesia
cause more
on their
harm
way
on
to
average than, say, a
Australia,
Christian
and some
fundamentalist.
apply
I
legally,
think that
and
is
some hire people.
the argument that I am making, that there is actually, as much as you're an atheist and you don't take all of your...
No, I agree with that 100%, but I don't think there are like full countries full of Christians that are producing and being as fucked as like these countries in the Middle East. But I'm sorry, forget I even said that. Regardless, like, can you give me an answer to the question, what is the general direction, the general policy direction then that we move to fix these problems?
I think that, firstly, America and Australia, we're kind of lucky because we got big oceans in front of us and we don't have to worry too much about people coming to our countries.
I mean,
I
we
think
had
that
9/11, dog. I mean,
no. As far as terrorism, look. I think
I mean,
terrorism is
9/11 was a pretty
yeah,
terrorism
no.
kind of
I'm
thing.
not talking about terrorism. I'm talking about immigration. I think
Okay.
that that when you're talking about terrorism is what you should be rightly criticizing as the poor example of what to. That's what you rely on generally in your argumentation, saying we've got X many Muslims and look how few terrorist attacks we've had. I think that's a poor argument generally because the average person shouldn't be concerned about terrorism. The average person should be concerned about importing people whose
Sure. Well,
values are
terrorism
entirely
isn't really a
antithetical.
problem like in any part of the world right now,
Yeah,
except for some places
well,
in the
yeah,
Middle East.
yeah,
Like Germany
yeah.
should not be living under a guise of terror because every moment they're having like terrorist attacks. But I know. But okay. So, but what is your solution or what movement?
So I think that Europe needs to significantly wind back their humanitarian intake, primarily because most of the people in Europe are not humanitarian
Okay, but how does
refugees.
that help people
That's
coming over to your attack and committing terrorist attacks? And how does that help your own people that might be
well,
radicalized and commit terrorist attacks?
the biggest problem that most countries have isn't necessarily people emigrating who are terrorists. It's sort of homegrown radicalism
Okay, so
of
maybe those people
terrorists.
that are homegrown, then maybe they just import them instead. Like they try to sneak into the country illegally.
Who they're homegrown are importing foreign terrorists.
I mean, I guess like
Is that, is that,
it sounds like your solution is literally like turn off all the immigration and just keep all of that world there and let them like nuke themselves or what like
Well, I think that if you're going to have an immigration policy, which most nations should have, it should be based off of need and it should be based off of population. So, for example, I think that importing a minority group, so if I was to list an order of preferences, I would put atheists, homosexuals, Christians, Alawites, probably maybe Kurds who haven't yet fled, Jews at the top of my immigration list when you're talking about Syria or Iraq. Then under that, I will put Shiite Muslims who are actively being massacred. And then under that, I will put Sunni Muslims. But more importantly, I don't know if there. I don't necessarily believe that there should just be a a a necessity to bring in people.
sure.
Who,
How does
whose
this
views
fix
are
any of the
antithetical.
problems in the Muslim world though? This isn't
The Muslim world is I think is going to be
it's
fucked for the
irredeemable.
next 200 years. Possibly not irredeemable, but if it continues on its current trajectory, things are going to get worse. They're not. The
Okay,
Muslim world isn't trending towards secularism and pluralism. 20
but
years maybe.
it's in okay.
But like, okay, you've been doing all of your reading on Saudi Arabia and Iran. Would you say that the trajectory of those two nations has been more or less Muslim over the past
Iran
50
was
years?
before the Iranian revolution. Iran was like very
Yeah,
very.
but I'm talking about the
interesting.
trajectory. I'm talking about dealing with modern day.
It's hard to say
consequences.
because we constantly fuck with everything. I mean, we've been fucking Iran's economy for the
But
past fucking
that's
how
not, that's
long?
not
Like
what
we
we're-
just
that's not
lifted.
that's not what I'm asking. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm asking you.
You're asking me what is the trajectory of these countries that have been constantly fucked and meddled with
No,
the
no,
West
no,
for the
what
past
is
50
the
years? Like,
trajectory?
yeah,
No,
I
no,
mean,
no,
yeah,
I'm
it's a
not
bad
asking-
trajectory. Like,
no.
what?
That's again, that's you're miss. I didn't say that. I said what. I'm not asking you to predict the future. I'm saying what has been in the last 50 years. The past has happened. We can analyze the past. We can't predict.
It's
the
been a
future.
bad trajectory.
Okay, so if things were to continue on the current trajectory, even with or without, if I'm telling you, we learnt from the examples of Iraq and Afghanistan what happens when you pull out prematurely. Things get a lot more worse and get a lot more fundamentalist because it is a ideology which is inherently useful to.
But that's
to anyone
not
who
true.
wants to
The
take
reason
advantage
why
of it.
Iraq was so fucked was because we put a dictator in there. We dismantled the previous government completely. We banned every single Baath person from being in that government. So Sunni had no representation in the government. Like what you're acting like Iraq was left to its own devices and they somehow spit out ISIS when it couldn't be further from the truth. And then you're saying
No,
like,
no,
well,
what's-
look what happened. That's not
No, no,
true
no.
though.
No. What I'm saying is that irrespective of whether you pull out or whether you stay there, you are still going to have to deal with the issue of religious sectarianism, irrespective of what your future plan is or what the past is. I'm trying to deal with it. Okay, so when someone comes in and you need to treat them, you need to engage with CBT with a patient. You don't discuss their past because you don't really care about their past, right? The reason for a person's body dysmorphia is largely irrelevant to the process moving forward. And most times, ruminating on the past is going to be counterproductive.
Wait, for
right?
for
And
what? What are you talking about?
any sort of when you're talking about treating an issue, if we want to go down the path of, I was going more down the path of discussing the issues with Islam as a religion, but you want to put it more towards the political of what is the solution currently, which I can engage with.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is that when you're trying to diagnose an issue, and I would argue that you haven't fairly diagnose the issue, but we can move past that and move on to the actual treatment. So irrespective of what the diagnosis might be, what's the actual treatment moving forward? And what I'm saying is that talking about, the the Iran-Contra thing and America's involvement with Iran and the British oil and all of that is completely irrelevant to the 19th of January. It's the 19th of January 2017 and moving forward.
Wait,
right?
but that's so not, that's the worst analogy ever, because that analogy supports my side 100%.
There's no sides. I'm agreeing. I'm saying that whether or not.
But if a guy comes into your office because he's fat as fuck,
yeah,
you can't just prescribe something to him to fix his fatness without understanding why he's fat. You have to know how he got there in order to understand where he's going.
So
you can't
what I'm saying is that person's fat because he eats a lot of shit.
But we don't know that. But that's just the thing. We don't know that because you're saying that it doesn't.
Fat?
Maybe he literally lives in a fucking pod that wheelchairs him electrically around his house all fucking day long. Maybe he has hypothyroidism, and
that's fine. But he's still eating more than he should.
Sure, but I'm saying that there are a lot of, but I'm saying, sure, but that might not necessarily be the best answer. Maybe he's eating an okay amount, but he needs to get a little bit more physical exercise, or maybe he's eating an okay amount, but he's got a metabolic issue, or maybe, like, there could be other things. You're saying that, like, you can just give one solution to a problem without having any idea of how the problem got there. That's absolutely.
I'm saying we don't agree on the nature of the problem.
But the nature of the problem it informs the solution of the problem.
Correct. So my problem, the nature of my problem and the issue that I see is that if this was occurring in South America, if we had the exact same level of geopolitical meddling in South America, which has happened, there would be less support there for extremism and fundamentalism, largely because of the fundamental tenets of the people believing it. I would argue that Christianity is generally going to be a much less militant religion than following the example of the primarch of the Islamic faith, Muhammad, who was a conquesting warlord, where there is structural support and political support for that. Like, I mean, look, one of the fundamental things about, say, if you're talking about Christians, is, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, blah, 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 and an explicit rejection of politicization of the Christian religion, right? You can have your opinions, you can have your faith, but it was very clear that you still pay taxes and you still follow the law of the land. That doesn't exist in Islam because there's a whole political system. There's a taxation system under the jizya. There's a system of food preparation. There's a system of prayer. There's a system of employment. All of these are inherent in a document written by a man who founded a state, who founded a caliphate. So what I'm saying is that generally, if you look at the Middle East, that the large predominant, the reason there is such a massive issue, aside from the geopolitical meddling, which I agree with, but the reason it keeps flaring up and things keep getting worse is primarily because of the religion. Is what I would be suggesting. And that is why Muslims in other countries who have nothing to do with that geopolitical region, who don't even come from that geopolitical region, who don't even have family from
there. A massive minority, an insanely small minority, a very, 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 very minority. You're making it sound like Muslims en masse are fleeing to go and join the fight. Like,
no, this is the discussion we had at the beginning, the different levels of jihadism, Islamism,
sure,
conservative Islam. And generally the trend is the bigger a proportion of your country that becomes Muslim, the more issues you get as the push towards conservatism and Islamism occurs. Like, so France is one of the largest Muslim populations in Europe, and no surprise, they've got the highest rates of of terrorist attacks in the last couple of years in Europe. They got the highest numbers. They got the biggest issues.
France's culture, though, has also been some of the most combative against Islam as well, though, right? France a decade ago moved to ban
what other immigrant group in France has caused that many issues?
I feel like if I were to go back in history, I could find some, but I don't know my European history at all.
That's fine.
Don't you guys in Europe? Haven't you guys in Europe been fighting with each other, like for the maybe past like no, but like past like the fucking like before like the 1800s or whatever? Didn't everybody in Europe fight with everybody for all the fucking time? I feel like there's tons of conflicts that go around and different people that hate each other.
Yes, but what was the reason for that? And I would also say it's largely political in the last 200 years. Every world war, it wasn't Protestants fighting Catholics in the last 100 years.
Oh, fuck yeah, I didn't even think of that. The fucking world wars. Fuck.
Correct. But why were they fighting?
You don't think they were I don't know, dude. What were the people that the Germans captured? I feel like they were bounded together by something. I don't remember what it was though.
Are you talking about World War I or World War II?
World War II. What were the names of all the people that they put in the concentration camps? What was that based off of?
The Jews?
Oh shit.
Yeah, okay, but now let's unpack.
Does that not? Oh, now we have to unpack, and now there's more reasons, and now it wasn't Christianity, and it didn't have anything to do with religion. It was actually because of this or this or this or this or this. Like, what?
So if we want to talk about it, I'll talk about it with you. But if you're just going to be hysterical and yell at
Okay,
me,
what?
then it's not
Okay,
going to be
unpack
productive.
it for me.
So let's start at World War One, for example, firstly, and then we'll go to
Mm-hmm.
World War Two very quickly. World War One, what caused the issue? What religious issue provoked the start of World War One, the bloodiest war in history up until that point? There wasn't one. It wasn't a
Sure,
religious
the
thing.
assassination of the one shitty band.
Yugoslavia,
Yeah.
Franz Ferdinand, correct. World War Two, Hitler, yes, had a massive issue with the Jewish population. He also had a massive issue with the Slavs and the Poles and everyone else who he didn't deem an honorary Aryan like the Japanese. You know, Lebensraum, German living space, was the invocation of the invasion of Poland, right? So this is a political goal that is buttressed nicely with religious prosecution, but not Christian religious prosecution. Hitler was deliberately he was not a Christian man who advocated who looked to the Bible as his instruction. He used the Jews as a religious and ethnic minority as a convenient scapegoat to whip up a country into frenzy. If you're going to argue that the reason that the Protestants in Germany were fighting the Protestants in America who came over to help out was because of religion, then I think that's a silly argument. On the other hand, you had that article that was sent to you earlier about ISIS's own manifesto and their explanation, where they explicitly say, and I think you should probably read that now, because they explicitly say that Westerners and that liberals will specifically argue about the geopolitical motivations, and they are clear in that geopolitical motivations are not only the last reasons on their list, but even if they were not geopolitical motivations, they would continue to murder everyone else. It's literally a them watching every apologist in the West and disagreeing with them in writing about their motivations. Whereas a lot of groups who are terrorist in nature would usually argue some sort of a political means to an end. You know, Palestine, sure, it's got the Muslim thing, but it's got the two-state solution, and there is no talk, even in the original Israel-Palestine agreement, about a separation according to religion, unlike, say, India and Pakistan. So what I would suggest is that
Why wouldn't, if ISIS was just recruiting people on the basis of religion, why wouldn't they just get the Shia people and run the fucking country? Why would they go after the persecuted minority that had been oppressed and radicalized by the majority? Why not just go after the Shiite people then?
who? ISIS?
Yeah, why not just
Because
recruit
they're
all them?
Sunni. Because they're Sunni.
Why not switch to be Shia and get the Shias then, if that's the
Because
majority?
that's because a Sunni is arguably to many, a Shiite is to arguably many Sunni Muslims worse than a Jew or an atheist, because they have heard the word of God and explicitly denied it by following their own strain of Islam. As far as people being murdered by ISIS, Shiite Muslims are at the number one on that list. They're the people who've been massacred the most by ISIS at this point. They're not murdering. There aren't millions of Christians in Syria, tens of millions in Syria that they're targeting over Shiite Muslims. They're the main antagonists that they have. So I think, again, I think maybe reading the Quran and reading the Hadith and reading the biography of Muhammad and understanding the reasons that Shiites and Sunnis have been fighting since 620 AD is important, because that informs much of the nature of the conflict today.
I don't know, dude. For all the studying that I did of shit going on in the Middle East, I didn't see fuck all having to do with religion. It was never brought up. It was never a thing. Like, the Sunni people flocked to ISIS because they found refuge in common religious belief. Like, this was never anything. Or Baghdadi, went to Mosul and preached and was able to convert all of these people to. It was never anything about that.
If it wasn't a religious thing, then why wouldn't, as you just stated, why wouldn't the Sunnis go and recruit the Shiites into their political cause?
Because they're two different political groups of people.
So now it's a political issue. So Shiite Islam and Sunni Islam is primarily political in distinction.
Yes, these are all political divides. Sure, I mean, they might define themselves religiously.
Mate, I think that if you're gonna start saying if you believe that the difference between Catholics and Protestants is political over religious, then I think that there's gonna
and the 98% or whatever, but the 98% Christian Germany population and the 1% Jew, that's not religious. That was political scapegoat. And there's
it
a
was
20-minute.
Religious. It was 100% religious, because if they weren't Jews, they wouldn't be able to be scapegoated. Yes, I agree. But what I'm saying is that there weren't Protestant churches and Catholic churches all around the world cheering on Hitler for murdering the Jews. That's why every Western nation went into war over them. I think that's a poor argument.
Okay, but there are mosques all over the world that also say shit about ISIS. And there are ones that are... I'm sure, dude, the KKK, I'm sure you could have found people in the KKK or whatever that would have said the fucking neo-Nazis and shit they would talk about. What do you mean? There are neo-Nazis all over the world. What?
Okay, I get it. But what I'm saying is that it's a matter of proportion. having 1% of Catholics, let's say 10% of Catholics worldwide who supported the actions of the KKK would be deeply concerning. And we're fortunate it wasn't at that number. But there aren't only 10% of Muslims who believe that Sharia law should be instituted by force. That's ridiculous if that's what you're going to suggest.
Why didn't the Kurdish people who are Sunni majority join the ISIS people? Why didn't all the people from Kurdistan just join up with ISIS?
Well, a lot of Kurds also aren't just Sunni. That's an explicitly political. That's a group of people that have existed
So
for
that's
1,500
political?
years. Sorry.
So that's a political thing. It's not a religious thing. Even though Kurdish people,
the Kurds are fighting to establish Kurdistan, which is a country, which is a political entity.
Okay, so here the religion doesn't matter at all?
The religion does matter.
Then why didn't they join ISIS? Couldn't ISIS have helped them build Kurdistan?
No, because they're establishing a caliphate. They would like to be the only ones in charge of that region. So no, ISIS. The reason ISIS doesn't have any allies, aside from possible Wahhabist or Salafist funding from Saudi Arabia, is because they aren't going to work with anyone else. That's part of their doctrine inherently. It's the reason why they have had falling outs with Al Qaeda, whereas Boko Haram is on side with them because they swore their fealty and their allegiance to them.
I'm pretty sure the reason they had a falling out with Al Qaeda is because the Baghdadi dude didn't give a fuck about what anybody in the Al Qaeda dude said and just went and did his own shit. I don't think it was religious or extremist differentiation. I mean, I think they started to differentiate a little bit more than that, but
I think the problem I have is that this issue generally, I think, okay, the instinct is to say religion is nothing. We're all people. There's no difference.
No, that's not the instinct. Or that's not what my goal is. My goal is, I think that there are, and you agreed with some of these tenets, there are a ton of geopolitical influences in the Middle East
with all of
that are
them. I
causing to
agree
be
with
fucked
every
up.
single thing
And
you
I
said
think that
regarding
these
that.
are the easiest things to move and fix. And that once those things are fixed, we can start nitpicking over, is somebody the right brand of Islam, or is religion a big thing?
Okay,
Like, that's,
but what about say the biggest issue that we've had recently regarding crime rates in Australia and what's overrepresented is first, second, and third generation Lebanese Muslims. So born here, well educated, tertiary education, causing issues. So if we right now make the Middle East disappear, Syria, Iraq, all of those countries disappear, I don't think that other Muslim countries are going to automatically get better. I don't think Indonesia is going to be better on human rights. I don't think Erdogan's going to step down and stop pandering to the religious conservatives in his nation. I don't think Egypt is going to go back to what it was 20 or 30 years ago. I don't think Iran is going to become a better place that's all of a sudden secular just because it all resolves itself. What I'm saying is that I believe that you can compare religions and you should compare religions, because some religions are better and worse than others. If every religious person, including Christians, became a Jainist tomorrow, there would be much less violence in the world. I would argue that.
yeah, but that's not a realistic solution. It's never going to happen.
It's not a solution, but what I'm discussing, and I think the main point of contention is that anything you suggest solution-wise, I'm going to agree with. Stop meddling there. Let them handle their own affairs. Empower people who we think are going to be the most moderate or the most secular. I don't disagree with any of the political issues that you have, aside from maybe not taking in 5 million undocumented migrants into Europe and allowing them to walk all the way to Sweden when they're not actually genuine refugees currently living in Jordan or in Lebanon or any of the other periphery nations, or Turkey. They don't go through 12 different nations to get to the best one with socialized healthcare and also happen to be Bangladesh or Indonesia. Right, that's probably the only issue we might disagree with, immigration.
No, I don't disagree with that. When I was looking up immigration numbers in fucking Germany, it seems like there are groups of people that are really fucking retarded. Like, I don't think not to sound racist, but I was in Germany. I probably wouldn't want anybody from North Africa in my fucking country, because these people disproportionately represent crime and shit compared to people like Syrian refugees that have lower crime rates than the native populations. Yeah,
because
sure, I don't disagree with that. I have no problem.
Refugees,
yeah,
correct.
Listen, when you want to talk about like looking at people, like, I think that there are a lot of really good indicators, or from the brief amount of research I've done on immigration in Europe, there are some really good indicators on crime, and region seems to be a really good one. If I were to look at people in Muslim and look at Muslim crime in Germany, that doesn't tell me anything, because people like Syrian refugees or refugees coming from that region tend to be very good. They seem like they try to integrate. The crime rates are very low, lower than the national population, the native population, even according to the 2015 stats I saw in Germany, right? These are true facts. But Muslims that come from fucking Northern Africa, I don't know why, seem to be really fucking violent. They seem to have a lot of crime, disproportionately represent people committing crimes, and also don't get fucking jobs. I don't know why, but like, I think that analyzing by region and shit is fine. That's not my problem. I've never had a problem with that. And maybe even that needs to extend to more Muslim countries, depending on the stats. That's fine. My only problem is that if you play the religion card too hard, you get insane people like Trump literally saying things like, we need to get rid of Muslim immigrants. Like, holy shit. That's not a good state. Like, that's where those statements lead to. Like, that's my problem with it. Like,
I understand that argument where it's like a slippery slope concern, where if you start highlighting Muslims, then there is the potential for it to go too far. I disagree with the idea of not having any Muslims immigrating. That's retarded, right? That's ridiculous. Because I would like the Muslims who are my best friends, or who live next door to me, or who I work with day to day. Those are people that I would happily take more of.
Or the actual refugees coming from actual war-torn places, and not people coming all the way from Central Africa, going all the way to fucking Sweden, trying to live off of state welfare. Yeah, sure. Sure.
Correct. But what I'm suggesting is that the nominal Muslim. Have you been to any Muslim majority countries before?
Yeah, I've been to Germany like 12 times. Dude.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. No, I don't think I unless Poland is. No, I don't think so.
Okay, so that's part of the concern that I think I have, and that a lot of Muslims have. Because don't forget, a lot of first and second generation Muslims in the West are people who fled the religious bullshit of their forebears and the political bullshit of their forebears, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are very few people who emigrated in the 60s because they really loved living in Syria or Iran or anywhere more than they emigrated for a reason, right? Particularly when you look at, say, Lebanon and countries that had
half my family is Cuban. Like, I know.
Yeah, exactly.
My different places that suck shit, and you talk shit on them.
Correct.
The time. Yeah.
Correct. So the thing is, though, is that you would expect that those populations would be well integrated. But the problem that we are starting to have, I know we're having this issue in Australia, is that you get first, second, and third generation descendants of the original migrants who have ridiculously overrepresented crime rates. Who
wait, and you said in Australia? I can't speak to Australia.
No, but not just no. We don't have to talk about just Australia. But that's not an unusual thing. In England, you're not getting 60-year-old first generation migrants fleeing to fight for ISIS, right? You're getting young guys like the Jihadi John and all of the young British guys who were in all the ISIS propaganda videos. Guys in their early 20s, some early guys in their early 30s. You're getting young guys. You're getting guys who are born there, educated there, who speak with an English accent, migrating out. And part of the issue that I have is that what I would like is for the Muslim community to react with the same rage after the Charlie Hebdo shootings, in the opposite direction, right? So when you get cartoonists massacred in Europe, and you get cheers in certain Muslim majority nations, and then silence from other Muslim nations, that's part of an issue. That's an endemic issue. It's a silent acquiescence to what's going on over there. Now, that might be just because there's apathy among Muslim populations worldwide. There might be because they're like, well, I'm not that type of Muslim, so I don't give a shit. But the problem is that it's not. There isn't a unified consensus among Muslim majority nations that terrorism, for example, is wrong. That's not something that exists in the Muslim world.
I disagree. I think that there have been, everybody always says this, and then anytime you go and look, like, there are tons of Muslims that disagree with what's going on with ISIS shit. I could probably pick out dozens of them in my chat. You could
in your chat, but what countries? What we're talking about proportions. We're not talking.
Well, like,
about...
are you expecting to see them like make like a big building that says we hate ISIS, or like?
Okay, what percentage of Catholics worldwide would you be uncomfortable with demanding the execution of homosexuals? Pick a number out of 100. What percentage would make you a bit uncomfortable about
any
Catholics?
Percentage? I don't know. I don't understand the point of any percentage. I would be.
Okay, so that's...
But you have to understand that, like, a poll question that asks you, do you think gay people should be killed? Like, dude, honestly, I don't know what my mom would answer to that. And she's the nicest person in the world, but she thinks that HIV was a disease created by God to get rid of AIDS people, or to get rid of gay people. She really thinks that, right? I think if you polled Catholics, you would probably find that number is a double-digit number. 20, 30, maybe 40% of Catholics think that gay people should be killed or whatever, but they're not going to go out and do it, right? The way that you answer a poll about your religious belief like that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to take up a fucking cross and go and burn a gay dude on it. Like,
the thing about polling, though, is that generally you get an effect in any sort of psychological polling where you get acquiescence to what the subject believes the interviewer would like to hear.
Sure.
So generally you get a problem in polling where people, part of the issue, say, with probably Trump winning,
is that most some of the people
being
polled
interviews probably thought that the interviewer would want to hear Trump, or they'd get mocked if they said Trump, so they didn't say Trump and they said Hillary, or they said they didn't know but then actually voted for Trump. The problem you get, though, is that when you have Muslims in Sweden or Muslims in England or Muslims in Australia or any Western country, it isn't a fraction of a percentage that believe that apostates should not receive the death penalty, or that Sharia law isn't the right way to live, or that don't have deeply antithetical
Yeah,
values.
but even like Sharia law, like there are people that pick and choose like what it means to live under Sharia law. Like that's something that all Muslims, if you were to poll all Muslims, like, do you think a country should live under Sharia law? Maybe a lot of them would say it, but a lot of Muslims disagree what exactly Sharia law means or what exactly means. Much the same way with Christians, you're gonna ask, should everybody follow the 10 Commandments? That's something that probably 80% of Christians, should everybody follow the 10 Commandments, not even realizing that I think the first commandment is you shall have no other Lord your God except for me or whatever. Like. Or
Yeah,
how many
but
Christians still work on, like, how many Christians say we should be Christian nations and still be allowed to work on, like, Saturday or Sunday or whatever, even though those are the Sabbath, depending on your flavor of Christianity? Like, I don't know, dude.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying, but I think that I would suggest reading Dabiq, that link that you were sent, that PDF that you were sent, at the very least. But I would really suggest reading the actual texts of the religion. You've read the Bible, obviously.
Should I read the Westboro Baptist Church thing book next?
Okay. Why do you think that the Westboro Baptist Church is a rational comparison to what I just suggested?
Because it's a group of people that are interpreting a religious text to get the political motive that they want.
Okay, what population of the Christian majority, or not the Christian majority, what percentage of Christians worldwide do the Westboro Baptist Church make up?
I have probably a lower amount,
something
but this doesn't. But we're talking past each other again because geopolitically, the Western world is a lot more stable. So I would expect there to be. I mean, like, if you're trying to trick me into saying like a higher percentage of Muslims are radicalized than a percentage of Christian, actually,
yes, that's what I'm saying. Yes,
yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Accurate.
But that percentage, like, it's not like you're taking a mixture and then pulling it out at random. Like, these are people at very specific parts of the world that have different beliefs. Like, it's not just like we're all living together and all the Muslims happen to believe something different. Like.
Mm-hmm. Well, look up the Wikipedia link just for Muslim attitudes towards terrorism, right? And even in the most conservative of studies, you still get some quite alarming percentages where 19% of Muslims in France believe that suicide bombing can be justified rarely, 10% sometimes, and 6% thought it could be justified. So you've got a third of the population in France, of the Muslim population, saying that there is sometimes a use for suicide bombing civilian targets explicitly. Like, that's something concerning. And you don't get those.
I mean, it depends on I don't know what the fucking question or the scenario is. Like, but somebody got really mad when I said it before. But we adamantly support Israel, and we think that there are good reasons to sometimes bomb civilian targets when Hamas hides behind them. And the majority of Republicans, who are majority Christians in the United States, believe that that's okay. That Israel, I got a huge email from a dude about how Israel tries so hard not to kill civilians, but like these are people that think it's justified for Israel to launch attacks against civilians because, well, there are reasons. Like, because Hamas hides behind them, right? You might have a million excuses for why they do it, but at the end of the day, you're still checking the yes box on that poll. Are there sometimes reasons to target civilians? Sure, Hamas might be hiding there, right? And
okay, what would it take? I think this is probably what I should have asked at the beginning. But what evidence would you require in order to believe that Islam as an ideology is causing a significant amount of problems?
If you saw like a lot of radicalization, like a decent chunk of radicalization going on in Western countries from native Muslim people, then I would definitely, then at that point I would definitely start to reconsider.
What would a decent chunk be?
I don't know. Like I would have to. I don't know what the percentage would be, dog.
So we've had between 27,000 and 31,000 people traveling to Syria to join ISIS at the moment. Is that a significant chunk? 20 to 30,000. It's a reasonably sized stadium at this point.
Of 20 or 30,000 of 1.4 billion. I think that's not even 1%. Is it?
So that's not. You're not concerned. That's not enough to suggest that maybe there's something about people.
No, definitely not. No, not even close.
From countries, over almost 1,000 from Germany alone have gone.
Definitely not. No, definitely not. Not even close.
So why are those people? Why are those second and third generation born Muslims in Germany going to fight for ISIS?
I thought we already went over this.
No, but like why? Why are they going? Why are native born Muslims in other countries who probably speak German with a German accent, who do speak German with a German accent? Why are they going to fight in the Middle East specifically?
I don't know. I would have to go and ask them. I've heard and read a lot of different reasons for
So
it.
I would suggest that the reason they do is because they're taken in by the rhetoric of ISIS. They are taken in by the religious messages and the nasheeds and the propaganda.
Those aren't the
on
messages
Lively.
that the propaganda send. Religion is always the subtext. The overt text is, are you in some place where you feel like you don't belong?
Except, okay, well, that's not when they sing a nasheed praising Allah over the top of it. That's obvious. But when you read ISIS's own when you read Dabiq, their actual magazine that they put out.
I'm not reading the like. If you
explicitly-
look at the actual recruitment videos, it's not a bunch of people in a mosque praising the correct version of Allah or establishing the caliphate.
Yeah, but they're not. It's not a guy sitting down and explaining the geopolitics of the region and saying that even though you're born in Germany and your ancestors are Moroccan, you should come and fight for political war in Iraq and Syria.
No, it's usually targeting a person. It sounds like shit targeted towards adolescents. Like, do you feel like you? I don't know. I could go find the ISIS German recruitment video, but
exactly, like
what Yankee said in
just-
chat, like, are you a loser? Join ISIS. Like, that's essentially like the fucking meme. Like, do you feel like everybody fucking hates you? Like, are you kind of like a
but
social
to go and
outcast?
fight for ISIS, you have to convert, and that's why young women in Sweden who have gone to fight there. And there was that whole BBC TV show about women going to fight for ISIS and that whole thing that kicked up a stink recently. But I don't think we're gonna come to a conclusion. I agree with everything you said about the political issues regarding a solution to the.
I guess like the thing that bothers
issue.
me is like you literally just said, like, I didn't even know the numbers were that low. I kind of thought they would be higher. You're like 20,000 people, 1,000 people from Germany went and fought. Like, how many Muslims live in Germany?
Yeah, but that's not a rational argument. Okay,
There are
how many terrorist
1.5 million Muslims in Germany, and 1,000 go, and you want to blame the religion? What?
Yeah, but what proportion of people in German prisons are Muslim? Okay, we can ask that question. So we can remove the political machinations of that, get rid of that, and let's look up prison populations. I don't know what it is, but and we can see like how that's broken up and why is that?
Okay, but like, I don't know what the current prison population, but of the people coming in now, I know for a fact that the best indicator that you have for whether or not a person is going to end up robbing somebody is the country they come from and not their religion. Again, bring up the same thing I said earlier, the Syrian refugees tend to be very, very, very peaceful. People from Muslims from Northern Africa tend to be very fucked in the head.
Okay, well, what about? Okay, so here just the first thing I saw was an article about Muslims filling out 44% of high security prisons, despite being a 5% population in the UK.
From
So
www.muslimstatistics.wordpress.com.
something else. Do you find me your version? Do you want the Wikipedia one? Do you want the Daily Mail one?
I don't know. I would have to look at it, but you would also need to get a geographic breakdown too. Where do these people come from? Because most of the people coming from Northern Africa, I think, were Muslim as well. I don't know if that's where they all come from or what, but I mean, like, there are other issues that go into this as well. I'm curious. I'm sidestepping hardcore here.
Yep,
Do you think
that's fine.
do you think that black people are more prone to crime in the United States than white people are? Like, genetically
More prone
speaking?
to crime? What do you mean genetically? No,
Yeah.
that's no.
Okay,
You-
why
you-
are black
yeah,
people
no.
so overrepresented in our prisons compared to white people?
Because they're predominantly socioeconomically, or more likely to be socioeconomically or socially disadvantaged.
Sure. So, I mean, there are a lot of other issues that play in there. And why are they more
Sure.
likely to be socioeconomically disadvantaged?
But
Like, 'cause
the way we know that there's not any black people is because we know, say, among West Indian populations in America, they do ridiculously well. So it's specifically a problem of largely the descendants of slaves or from African black people. We know that. We have that empirical data. Isn't Colin Powell West Indian? Like, isn't he from that whole thing? Like,
Yeah,
we
he
know
might
that
be.
it's not a matter of genetics. Like, it's very easy to...
Sure,
to-
but I could find
to-
similar, very successful Muslim people in these positions as well.
Okay, find me a successful Muslim nation that you would be happy to live in.
Not a Muslim nation.
But isn't that the best example? Or isn't a Muslim majority country, wouldn't that be the best argument that you can make as to why there is nothing inherently wrong with the religion of Islam
I don't
and
know,
the political
dude.
overtones that
like,
brings?
my argument is that fucking Europe could have been any fucking collective religion, and Europe is the one that expanded and was the most successful, and Europe spawned off from them. It didn't matter what the fuck the religion was; they could have been fucking anything, and then you would have seen these exact same divides. Muslims and Christians could have swapped places, and I don't think that Christianity would be thriving in the Middle East or the Muslim world constantly fucking with them. This is why you see Christian countries that are still massively fucked. It's not because they're Christian that they're successful. It's geopolitical bullshit.
But again, like factually, we know that aside from hypotheticals are hypothetical. We know factually that you're going to have a better quality of life in pretty much every Christian nation than you would in pretty much every Muslim nation.
I
Aside
mean,
from if you're
maybe.
in the Saudi
Qatar is the highest
world.
GDP per capita in the world. That's
Yeah, but they also have the World Cup coming up and have Pakistani slave
WEOW.
labor dying in record numbers. So as far as like quality of life indexes go,
Yo, dude, I'm
it's
not a
probably-
slave laborer. I mean, my quality of
Yeah,
life
so
is big.
it's when we're talking about when we're talking about level of female education, if we use that as a yardstick,
Sure.
there probably isn't a Muslim nation that turns up well or looks good in that compared to any other Western nation. When we talk about number of apostates murdered or interfactional, there is across the board on any sort of objective measure of human rights or anything really, anything you're talking about, that sort of the beauty of the West, or where you can be your own person, do your own thing, and you have
Sure,
a
I don't
government set up
disagree.
to protect you.
I mean, I don't disagree with anything you're
So
saying.
what I'm saying is that it kind of this kind of seems like when people who are socialist or communist say, yeah, but the issue isn't socialism or communism, it was the politics or the history or something about the character, or if we set it up right, it would be fine. But the problem is that I think with Islam is that we have not only in the present day, we have like a historical record of Muslim majority nations. We have contemporary Muslim majority nations in Asia and in Africa and in the Middle East, and even ones with large Muslim proportions in Europe. And, we're not seeing, these aren't nice places to live generally. And you can argue that in the Middle East, sure, I'll completely give that to you, geopolitical meddling and all that. But other countries like, Turkey, which as far as Middle East goes, has probably been the most stable nation in the last 50 years, probably, after they got all their genociding out of the way. They've been pretty okay. Tourists have been happy to go there. Women have had access to high levels of education. They've regressed. Morocco's regressed. Iran's obviously regressed, but we can throw that one out the window. Indonesia's getting worse. Bangladesh is getting worse. Like, that's the thing that I have, that for me, the clearest variable to look at is the predominant national religion, because geography seems to be it's a good indicator, sure, of like crime, but there are African nations that are doing better than other African nations, and European nations doing better than other ones. So for me, the biggest overarching variable that should be looked at is percentage Muslim population, because we know roughly what the majority of those people's views are going to be on a whole manner of issues. And that's I think that's the thing that I have. I think that it's been an inaccurate diagnosis of the issue, and I think the comparisons to, say, Christianity or any other religion fall apart a little bit. And I really do think that if you just read, again, don't throw the Westboro Baptist Church manifesto at me, but I think that there is value at the very least in understanding the text. So when people try and argue textually, like, I'm not going to argue, I'm not a Quranic theologian, so I'm not going to argue the religious minutiae of the religion, but I just think I don't really, I think, agree with that, and I don't know if I can convince you of that.
Okay, well, hey, listen, I appreciate the conversation. I'm fucking hungry. I was gonna get food like 40 minutes
Yeah,
ago.
me too. Oh, it's 5 o'clock here. That was a quick 5-minute chat. That was good.
5 p.m.
Here it is, yeah.
Oh my god, you guys are on such a fucked time scale compared to
It's
us.
the 19th here at 5 p.m. Anyway, mate, it was really good to talk to you.
Yeah, look, I appreciate the conversation, dude. I'll look up more
Me too.
stuff and
Me too.
all
And
that
I'm
good
not
stuff.
I'm not also a anti-Muslim figure.
Sure.
I'll just throw that out there.
All right, well, thanks. I appreciate the
All right,
conversation, buddy.
Have a good one. See you later.
Okay, I have to get food, guys. This fucking went on for way longer than I thought it would. I love you guys.